Good morning, everyone. I suppose that many of you may have wondered how to join our panel. And one moment. I suppose. Okay, had to turn off that sound. Anyway, many of you have wondered how to join our panel. And so I want to give you the link to do that now. And good morning, Anthony. Nice to see you. And so this is the link to join our panel and also to have notices from me every time I'm going on live. That's these days because I've taken up the task of being a school teacher. It means that just Sunday morning 10 to 12 and Wednesday afternoon 5 p.m. to 6:30 Eastern Daylight Time. And so if you wish to join our panel, I've put the link there. And good morning, Art. Nice to see you too. Great to see you here again. Here comes Jordan, so we'll be able to have a give and take on this section of the Red Book. And so we're talking from, we're not talking from my note here. That was my reminder of what Jordan taught us last week, but we're working with the Red Book of C.G. Jung, the Reader's Edition. And so good morning, Jordan. How's everything in Taos?
Excellent. We had this most amazing double rainbow, and it's that time of year. I mean, the skies here are always amazing, but you just get this pink and purple, and the double rainbow had a double green and double purple at the bottom.
Wow.
And a friend of mine noticed that, and I'd never hadn't noticed it, and it was just I'd never seen a rainbow with that. So it had this kind of verdant, regal. It's like, wow, Empress Emperor rainbow. This thing means business. It was just beautiful. So
did you get a photograph by any chance?
I got I'll pull one off of Instagram. I got one, but the one I got was as it started, and it was from the supermarket, so you get the parking lot in front. And she got one. It was out on farm, and it was just all verdant green underneath. Wonderful. And I'll send one to you.
Or we can also show it here because it's very meaningful to a lot of people.
Let me see if let me hop over there. I'll be right back.
Okay.
See if I can.
And meanwhile, I'm going to make you a co-host so that you can share and do course here. So what I wanted to do this morning is to first of all talk about a couple of sentences that are in a footnote. It's footnote 186 of page 344. And I just want to read this two sentences because I think it's incredibly important. So it reads as follows, quote, "The old man corresponds to the archetype of meaning or of the spirit, and the dark chthonic figure to the opposite of the wise old man, namely the magical and sometimes destructive Luciferian element. In alchemy, it is Hermes Trismegistus versus Mercurius, the evasive trickster." And I just wanted to mention, we have to recall that always there are opposites. Good morning, Dionysus. There are always opposites. That's what gets us going in the morning. That's where all the That's where all our psychic energy comes from. And the same power that says to me, oh no, I want to stay in bed today instead of doing this, but then I say, oh, but I have to get up and get going. And so and good morning, Amela, nice to see you. And so here Dr. Jung is making a very interesting statement, and I have to talk about it in terms of his whole collected works, because one of the issues that he raises always is the concept of meaning. What is meaning? What is the meaning of your life? What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of your life? And the reality is that we, at any given moment, are the meaning of our lives. And what that means is that we are not only the culmination of everything that's happened to us up till this moment, we are also the highest hope of all of our grandparents and ancestors, going back all the way to single-celled organisms. And so whatever that life was that got our particular opportunity to have a life going, all of those things did what they needed to do in order to make our lives possible, to make us exist. And so that's in Jungian ideas. Then it's the wise old man, the wise old woman, who are the culmination of not only their life, but all their ancestors' lives. And they are the meaning when they're alive. And then we look to their spirit after their death. So, for example, we're all spending a couple of years looking at this book, and this book is a numinous book because it has many, many, many interesting ideas that we can talk about. And so the meaning of Dr. Jung's life as the wise old man is going to be percolating through the ether of forever. It's never going to stop, because he's already obviously influenced many things in the 20th century, that he's influenced the fact that you are here right now, and we're all drinking from the well that he dug and put the pump in. So and so the meaning of his life is ongoing. And I think that we also need to know that, there's nothing to fear in death, because we are the meaning of our lives at any given moment. And our spirit does go on. Okay, it's immortal in a sense, and it may, for some of us, it may create just the tiniest little ripple on the world, but for others, it may be an immense and meaningful contribution. So, for example, when my roommate from the basic school in the Marine Corps was killed at age 24 in Vietnam on April the 11th, 1969, that didn't sum up his life at all, because he's been meaningful to me all of my life, and he's informed my life all of my life. His sacrifice was not only for me, but for all of us. And he still lives. His name was Robert M. Christian Jr. And Bob was a year older than me, and he was like my wise old man or wise older brother while I was at the basic school. And the fact that I'm talking about him now shows that his life had meaning to me, even at that time. And I'm sure all of us can point to ancestors who had tremendous meaning in our lives. But everybody in our life has some meaning to us, and whether good or bad. And so, and the opposite of that is the Luciferian element, the evil element. And so if anybody, I was communicating with some of my artist friends last night, and I pointed out that our former president is a Luciferian artist, because he, in one Head and Shoulders mugshot, he was able to raise $7.1 million in 48 hours. And
Well, and
so
also he had that look. He had the Kubrick stare, which is something that Stanley Kubrick would do in The Shining or any other movie, where it's the head forward, eyes looking up, and it really shows the I'm at the peak of my derangement kind of look.
Or I'm at the peak of my power. So in other words, if I look into my camera like this right now, you can see the whites of my eyes below my pupils, which isn't very often that you see that in people. And it's a very meaningful look, either for good or for evil. Yeah, it could also
very much reptilian or raptor. You get that kind of staring right into nature look.
Right. So this duality that Dr. Jung is talking about in this footnote is between the wise old person, doesn't have to be a man, and the Luciferian element, which is the trickster. The trickster is not always bad. I consider myself a Mercurius figure. And what is Mercurius doing? Mercurius is bringing up things from the unconscious that you haven't thought about. And that's what we do every Sunday here and in these videos, as long as they exist on YouTube. They will be bringing up things that maybe you hadn't thought about before in your life. And so that's the mercurial aspect. And of course, that mercurial aspect, Mercury is the messenger of the gods, bringing things up from the unconscious into the physical world. It can be for better or for worse. And so we obviously see the trickster as the dark side of that. But
and I named my cat Merc. Its full name was Mercurius, and I figured he would be as agile in his mood as his motion. But if you say Mercurius in a Texas accent, then he's more curious than most.
Well, and so I have been more curious than most, I suppose, because somehow I got hooked on Dr. Jung's work in the early 1990s, and it did make me curious. And I had to try to figure out, what does this 20 volumes mean? What does it mean? And the meaning of it comes down to one sentence, which is the whole purpose of Jungian psychology is to open access to the healing power of the unconscious, to allow your unconscious to heal you. We don't know how that happens because it's magic, it's alchemy, but somehow it's your own unconscious, not anything I can say, but your own unconscious, which heals you no matter what happens. And when we go to a funeral, for example, it isn't a being out there in the universe that decides whether you go to heaven or to hell. It's a being inside you that decides whether you go to heaven or hell in their psyche. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I appreciate that quote from Dr. Lawrence Jaffe. The whole purpose of Jungian psychology is to access the healing power of the unconscious. And my personal bent to go with that is that, in classic Latin, anima was both feminine, generative, and masculine, formative, because it referred to the spirit of nature and Mother Earth. And what's interesting is then you get the genius loci, which is the personality or genius of a place. But then when Jung turns and puts his own personal spin to go ahead and specifically feminize and masculinize the anima and animus, then what I find is then that genius loci, the power and personality of place, is attributed then into the psyche rather than location geographically or Mother Earth. And then you get the Mother Earth of your own personal Mother Earth of a psyche. So that he split up anima into anima and animus, I think was creative, because in the classic it meant both already, spirit and soul, feminine, generative, masculine, formative. And though animus was present, you could say anima and people would understand all of it. But that he attributed that into the psyche, then we get a genius loci of that healing power of the unconscious, as Dr. Lawrence Jaffe had expressed.
Yeah.
When I think of meaning, it depends on the context, because here in the United States, we are seen as like an individualistic society where we respect each other's individualism, whereas someone in Pakistan, which is a very strict country, they are much more collective in a sense where there is a certain way of thinking that's expected of people, and if it's not abided by, then there are serious consequences. And then we also have another example of meaning, and for me, in my 30 years of trying to understand and making sense of the world, I divide my experiences by the two P's, perception and perspective. So what I mean by that is oftentimes when a person, for example, I used to volunteer at this Ashkenazi adult daycare. And a lot of the people there were survivors of the Holocaust. If not everyone there was a survivor of the Holocaust. And if I had like a literature with Buddhist transcripts and Buddhist artwork in there, and they saw this Eurasian symbol of the swastika, which has been appropriated during the Second World War and was a product of deception, is a product of mass deception. And, our understanding of not, some people, again, it's all about perspective and personal understanding and personal meaning of, what these symbols and information are to an individual themselves. But what we know about Adolf Hitler is that after the First World War, Germany was very poor. People were starving. There was a somewhere between recession, depression happening economically. And so lo and behold, make that spam and, tough it out and put on your big girl pants, as someone said, put on your big girl pants and take it like a man.
Mhm.
I
I appreciate that you brought up the swastika because,
yeah.
4,000 years ago in China and in Native American cultures, that exact symbol was the wheel of life. So
Exactly.
it
Yeah.
already was
So this
totally
sort of like, with this, not necessarily that people are happy to be starving, but because it's one of the various Buddhist principles to sort of let go of something, to sort of sacrifice something. And people were starving in Germany during that time between World War I and World War II. And here is this man making these promises and having these symbols, so people were deceived. People were very much deceived. So that's the point that I was trying to
Well,
make. Thank you.
sure, and people can be very deceived. I would just comment on the swastika that it goes way farther back than you were suggesting, Jordan, because it goes back to ancient India. And I wouldn't even call it Hindu per se. It came out of ancient India, and it was adopted by many. Now, a dear friend of mine just gave me a gift, and I want to, as a symbol, as two symbols actually, and I just want to share it with you. It's a pair of pendants. And I don't know if you can see it clearly, but in the upper one is a dragon, and the lower one has a labyrinth. And the point is that, and mind you, my cane, my cane is now a dragon. Okay, and I take this, I use this at school every day. I've had more than 350 children put their finger in this mouth. And the point, it seems to me, is that all men need to learn to be fierce, okay, in terms of, and I'm talking about men now, not necessarily, and there's a certain element of that applies to women as well, but all men need to be fierce. But that comes naturally. That's an evolutionary function. And why did we develop that fierceness? It was because we're protecting our community. Our role is to protect the community. And so that fierceness is symbolized by my dragon. But what we have to remember is that our role is to protect the community. And that means we have to go through the labyrinth of life. We have to go in until we find the center. And in Jungian psychology, we would say it's the self. We have to get so we are very familiar with the self. And then we have to also find our way out from the center, back out into community. And so symbolically, the labyrinth represents all of our lives. And so I really appreciate this gift from my friend. It was just a gift out of nowhere, but it symbolizes everything that I think I'm about. And what is our role in society as men? Our role is to protect the community. And first, the community is first and foremost our family, but then it's to protect our community and not just be fighters for the sake of just being one-upsmen on somebody else. Our whole role in society is to defend our community, and
But I think
traditional
that's
and the traditional role of women has been to build society and to also protect it, but create it, and that's the creativity of the feminine. Now, all of us, and here I'm doing a feminine function because I'm trying to create a society that gets this. Jordan, your turn to talk.
Yeah, I several things. I think that's an apt statement, and at the same time, I think to me, tradition is often peer pressure from dead people, and it's knowing you don't have to cut the ends off the roast. Grandma's oven was too small, I mean.
Yeah.
So I find that strong enough to be gentle and fierce enough to be compassionate creates an unthreatened way. And for example, men don't give birth, and women have to be pretty darn fierce to give birth.
Absolutely.
And so I think, notwithstanding, traditional gender roles, I think now the gender role of any given person is, how are they fully integrated? Where is their place in the society, and they command themselves from that place and command out. So notwithstanding male or female, I think, both the feminine generative and masculine formative, run the course. And I think that it's interesting because the traditional gender roles then mix alchemically with what's at any given modern time. And I laugh because, for example, modernism in history, I don't know how many articles I wrote in college of, how boring and uncreative a title is that? Because when Michelangelo did David, it was modern, and that was modernism then. At the time, he didn't, I'm in the Renaissance or the Baroque or the Rococo. He didn't say, I have a Rococo David. It's like,
a bunch of 20th century art teachers and philosophers pointed back to it and said that's what it was. But
right, exactly. So everyone having to define and distinguish is kind of I find it a petty history, because there's not the not knowing, that space between the unconscious, the little mini abyss of every synapse between two neurons. That's half the story, at least in most cases. And then you have that functioning as a nonverbal, visual, symbolic heart of the matter in any given substance of a thought. Whereas if you don't have that, then you basically make too much sense to be worth a damn, and so.
Right.
So that's my little soapbox.
And going back to Mella's point about Pakistan, last week was the case of the 8 children who were in the cable car across a valley. They were 900 feet in the air, and on internet you can find now a video of them hanging in this very, very tenuous cable car. This is not Switzerland, I assure you. and one of the important things about that video is that you see down in the valley, and there are literally hundreds of people down there watching, hoping that they can save these children, obviously. And it was a very precarious operation when they did it. And those children, I think, because they felt a part of the community, they knew they would be okay if they just hung on. And so they were up there, I think, for more than 8 hours, just hanging by their fingernails. I mean, this wasn't a cable car that had, nice doors and safety locks and all that stuff. It was basically just a large barrel that was hung from a cable, and they got in the barrel, and it took them.
That's scary.
Yeah, I mean, it was something else. But my point is that in Pakistan, they are more collective in that sense. And yet we Americans will also come answer the call if something is happening. Certainly if I'm going along the road and I suddenly see a car on fire, and there's no first responders there, I'm going to respond to that. I'll stop my car, and even though I use a cane now and so on, I probably won't even notice the fact that my legs are lousy. I would just go to save someone if I could. And I think all of us know that in a pinch, no matter what it is, whether it's a flood or a blizzard or you have what have you, we will all, or a fire as in Maui, the whole community will step up and try to save people. And there will be no reference to, well, okay, those people are Muslim or those people are Jewish. There won't be any thought of that. It will just be the community saving the members of its community. And the place that we went wrong, and how as human beings, and how we have to turn back, is that we came up with all these systems, which we call religions, all over the world uniquely. They're all different, but they're all the same. And so we thought that we had to differentiate our religion, and only if we differentiated it would we be okay in heaven. But in the end, that doesn't solve anything. And what we have to do is turn around toward one another and make community of the whole planet, of all human beings, and learn what we can from one another. And
that's core. That's core to my. That's core to the dignity and difference concept that I beat everybody over the head with. Is disagreement that doesn't devolve into conflict is beautiful, because 6 months later I can go, I know you don't agree with me, and this thing is confusing me. What's your take? And they will have a perspective. So as Amela said, the perspective piece of that I could never have had. And then I'll look and go, oh, thank you. And we'll move on. But the thing is, I didn't knock off their hard edges. They didn't knock off mine. We learned how to dance. And in that sense, the communication with difference is so much better, which to me is one of the key aspects of even Venus in astrology. It's not about love, it's about difference, because difference then implies an ability to connect.
Right. Well, I love a handle that has just appeared on the YouTube channel, which is omelette au fromage, cheese omelet. And
omelet with
omelette au fromage. And I make a cheese omelet every chance I get, or a cheese and vegetable omelet, but today it happened to be an omelette au fromage for my wife. And it's she very much appreciates it. I'm not sure she could make an omelet for herself anymore, because I've been doing it for probably 6 or 7 years. And I have developed my own skill in making this omelet, and I pretty much make it the same every day, depending on the ingredients I had available. I didn't have vegetables available today, so I couldn't make it a Western omelet, but but I did have cheese, so I threw that in it. And so it's sort of a change in the masculine feminine roles, in the sense that I'm creating something. But I love it because every day I create a different work of art in that omelet, and every day it comes out differently. And what it does is it opens my spigot to my unconscious every time I do it. And, I'll stumble into the kitchen and I say, oh yeah, what is it I'm supposed to do? And sometimes I open the refrigerator and I say, oh, what do I need here? And then I remember, okay, yeah, I need the eggs, I need the egg beaters, I need the cheese, and I need the vegetables. 4 ingredients, usually. I mean, I don't usually get any fancier than that.
And that's tradition, no? This recipe, this repetitive process.
Right.
And some people are often so attached to their dead, as Jordan brought up, the old traditions. Some people are very attached to their parents, to their ancestors, and only become more and more dedicated to their understanding of what the worldview is from their perspective of how they were raised and how they maintain their lifestyle. There's this movie that I really wanted to bring up before with Michelle, I think it was. So this movie is based on a book titled W, but the movie came out in 2006. It's called The Painted Veil, and it's about an American epidemiologist, and he receives some kind of phone call to come to China and study an infectious disease. And he discovers that the disease is cholera because people are not burying their dead for reasons such as they cannot afford the burial costs, but also because they are too attached to accept the fact that their parent or their sister, have passed away. They are no longer, their spirit is no longer inhibiting this vessel. It is now just, sort of like a little hermit crab, they switch shells. So it's not here anymore. It's somewhere else.
Right. And you just reminded me of what I said when I had the phone call that my father had died. And one of his favorite dishes was sushi. And we knew that he was going to die probably in the next 24 hours. And so it so happened that the other members of the family were all eating sushi when this phone call came in. And the person on the hospital end of the line said, well, do you want us to leave him here until you come into the hospital so that you can see him? And I said, no, that won't be necessary here. He's here with us now.
That's good luck, because in my culture, when someone passes away, for 2 years, you cannot have any celebrations. You can't celebrate your birthday. You can't celebrate your graduation. It's like, oh, you graduated. Yay, congratulations. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't celebrate because someone died. You can't do any kind of celebrations for like about 2 years, because I don't know why, but apparently the person has deceased, but we have to let the person be in the ground, as they say, lay the person down.
Doesn't that induce no celebrations ever? Because people die
for 2 years. Yeah, for 2 years. It's just
someone else dies at 1 year and 364 days, and then you got a reset button.
No, I'm not speaking about other people. I'm speaking about family. Like family. If someone in the family, like if your cousin or your granduncle or your grand aunt passes away, then no one in the family that, like for example, when my grandmother passed away, I wasn't allowed to celebrate anything. So then after she passed away, my grandfather passed away, and I still wasn't celebrating anything anyway.
Yeah.
But now it's been almost a year, and everyone feels better collectively. We've all healed, and we believe that now he's with my grandmother again. They've rejoined in paradise. So now I can celebrate next week my 2 years of sobriety at Alcoholics Anonymous.
There you go.
Finally, I can celebrate something.
Yeah, I trust you're not gonna celebrate with Prosecco. Not at all.
Well, it used to be tequila. I used to be a really big tequila fan, and I often tell people in meetings, I feel like tequila is trying to seduce me back into my tequila habit, because one evening I heard this man riding his delivery bicycle, because I live in the city. So this man is riding his delivery bicycle, and he has these speakers on with these Bluetooth lights and everything. He looks like a Christmas tree on a bicycle. So he plays this song, and it's like a mariachi song, and he tequila bonita tranquila quieres tequila, and I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? And I'm standing at the light, I'm trying to cross the street, and the last thing on my mind is alcohol, and here's
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, man, all those margaritas, dang it. And I know 2 women named Rita too. So isn't that just fabulous?
Incredible.
Temptation.
Well, that goes back to, I think that's a good point with boundaries and people's affect regulation of how not to allow the things you don't want to happen to come in, where you have a bouncer, it's like, nope, not on the list. And instead of, oh, now I have an earworm and I can't get that out of my head.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a both.
I've had to start turning off the ads on my television because I can't get all these earworms that they're putting on us, and it really is crazy making almost.
Well, it's the catchy jingle, but it's advanced with wall of sound and total immersion now. I mean, so it's not just.
The point I wanted to make here was that an event such as my father's death, as soon as I tell the story, I'm immediately starting to weep again, and that's the healing power coming through again. And and the amazing thing about religion is that they developed separately but spontaneously within each religion a way to mourn and to allow the living to go on, remembering the dead, whatever the ritual is. It does open the healing power of the unconscious so that you can heal, and so it's difficult for the rest of us who are left behind by a death to cope with it. Okay, but the thing about religion is that they have developed methods to open the healing power of the unconscious, and that's what they do for us. And
well, I think with that, then that's the counterpoint to the Nomela's example of the 2 years where I don't want to be judgy. It just feels that death then is squelching life by an over amount of respect instead of a lament of the dead of, memories are blessings and remembrance. And, it's both and traditions are traditions. And, you follow what you follow. And that's the important piece, is that then that gives people an anchor, a buoy.
And you don't have to feel guilty if you don't follow the path of your parents or whatever.
Right.
You don't as Mary Oliver said, you don't have to be good. You don't have to crawl on your knees for 100 miles to pray. You only have to love what you love.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's a terrible paraphrase of her poem, but anyway, that's it. So now today we have earned a best part of an hour. And
so after all this death and pain and suffering, I would rather us just do one quick visual counterpoint and have a rainbow that is poetry in the sky.
All right, give it to us, since we mentioned it at the beginning.
Yeah, I think with all this, we need to cut the density.
So Jordan saw a double rainbow yesterday, and do you have it, Jordan?
Yeah, hold on. There we go.
Here we go.
And notice at the bottom, double green, double purple. And I've never seen, a friend of mine, really good friend of mine, said that, and I just, when she mentioned it, I just looked and oh my, I'd never, and I realized, even though I didn't know, I hadn't seen, I realized immediately I've never seen that before. And so anyway, this was to me pretty powerful. And I love the contrast too, that you're looking through this brightness of the trees and then the darkness in the top. It's like two whole worlds.
Right. Well, it's quite beautiful, and I love the fact that the rainbow represents a spectrum,
right? Which is community.
Yeah, and when you're painting a picture of the sky and there's rainbow in it, you always have to remember the Reggie Biv, where the red is and where the indigo is, and so on.
And I think it's funny, I think in my tarot deck there's one rainbow, and I think I intentionally went, I'm going to see who notices. I messed up the order.
Okay, so we're moving on now. And we haven't yet begun today's reading, so we're going to do that now. And again, there's some footnotes, but the significant thing here is that the things we talk about are memories, and this means all of us. And I find that almost always the things that I remember, the stories that I tell, were numinous events in my life. And I don't remember, average moments from day to day or minute to minute, nothing like it. But I do remember the numinous events that changed my life. And in some sense, I'm lucky because I've lived in so many places and had to rebuild my whole community every time. I went to 8 elementary schools in 7 years. And so, I have to think about it. That number, that statistic doesn't just come out easily, but if I go back, I can remember every one of them and how unique every one of them was. That's the interesting thing. And I'm talking about things that I was doing when I was 4 years old. So, and so I can just go through the list of where I lived as a child, and there's the school I went to, no problem. Okay, so
where are we starting?
We are on page 345. There was a break at that point. And I'll just read the last sentence of the previous paragraph, because it too is very important. And that sentence is, your poverty in what has become you will thus deliver into the wealth of the future. Okay. Your poverty in what has become you will thus deliver into the wealth of the future. So if you feel downtrodden and whatever, that poverty will push you to do the things that you need to do in order to have a good life later on. You're not going, if you burn yourself on a candle and that you feel impoverished by the fact that you're in pain, it will yield the fact that you're not going to put your finger in a candle anymore, unless you're some crazy person like Lawrence of Arabia in the movie by that name.
Well, and I'll say that too in a bigger picture, the lesson of anyone who's been through a hermit phase in their life, which, otherwise known as dark night of the soul, passage. One of the key things I find that's important to take from that is when you get to a place where it's dark all around, instead of being terrified, realize maybe it's for the first time because you're the light. Who's looking to you in their constellations? And then what happens is you've retrieved and consolidated yourself, but that's a whole new place because we're not psychologically often used to no lights. I mean, total immersion in darkness is the sensory deprivation chamber. That's why it's so hallucinatory, because it's such a difference. But I think when you find that your poverty and what has become you, no light all around, will deliver you into the wealth of the future, because then you are a light that can then emerge and come out of that cave and then move forward.
Precisely, as Winston Churchill once quipped, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, act like you own the place.
That's right. All right, I'm going to read, and we'll find a place to stop here at the bottom of this page. I'm on page 345. What seeks to distance you from Christianity and its holy rule of love are the dead, who could find no peace in the Lord, since their uncompleted work has followed them. A new salvation is always a restoring of the previously lost. Did not Christ himself restore bloody human sacrifice, which better customs had expelled from sacred practice since days of old? Did he not himself reinstate the sacred practice of eating of human sacrifice? If your sacred practice, in your sacred practice, that which earlier laws condemned will once again be included. However, just as Christ brought back human sacrifice and the eating of the sacrificed, all this happened to him and not to his brother, since Christ placed above it the highest law of love, so that no brother would come to harm as a result, but so that all could rejoice in the restoration. The same thing happened as in ancient times, but now under the law of love. So if you have no reverence for what has become, you will destroy the law of love. And there's a couple of footnotes here. One, when he says the same thing happened as in ancient times, but now under the law of love, you have not one title of Christian law is abrogated, but instead we are adding a new one, accepting the lament of the dead. And, I find that in my own life where I was extremely critical of both of my grandfathers, who were difficult men during my lifetime, but who had all kinds of trials and tribulations in their lives, unspeakable ones. And as you all know, my maternal grandfather lost his fiance, who died along with her 4 sisters on the same weekend during the Spanish flu. And he, you know, when I go back and think about that, then I can resurrect him. I can forgive him. I find ways that he was a good man, and he went on 2 years later to marry my grandmother. Therefore, I exist. But I mean, that's sort of an example. And then the other footnote. So if you have no reverence for what has become, you will destroy the law of love. And so my point in telling that story is that I now have reverence for his sacrifices and the difficulty of his life, and therefore I can reinstate love between me and him, which I did not feel, you know, in the last, I don't know, 30 years of his life, I guess. 20 years of his life, anyway. So the footnote reads, the draft continues. It is nothing other than common evil desire, nothing but everyday temptation, as long as you do not know that it is what the dead demand. But as long as you know about the dead, you will understand your temptation. As long as it is no more than evil desire, what can you do about it? Damn it, regret it, arise anew, only to stumble again and mock and loathe yourself, but definitely despise and pity yourself. But if you know what the dead demand, temptation will become the wellspring of your best work, indeed of the work of salvation. When Christ descended after completing his work, he led those up with him who had died prematurely and incomplete under the law of hardship and alienation and raw violence. The lamentations of the dead filled the air at the time, and their misery became so loud that even the living were saddened and became tired and sick of life and yearned to die to this world already in their living bodies. And thus you too lead the dead to their completion with your work of salvation. And so we can see the significance of the suicides of the police, the Capitol Police who committed suicide after January 6th. They couldn't cope with their failure, their perceived failure, and they didn't fail. They were heroes, of course, but their psyche took a hold of them, and you know, if they had gone on living, they would have seen the love of the rest of us for their sacrifice and for their work on that day and saving our democracy. And we would have been able to express that love. But at the time, it was so dark for them that you know, they just couldn't see that there would be love on the other side. And we have a dear friend of this channel, Khushbu Kantaria, who works as a suicide counselor in India. And she is an incredibly courageous woman. And and they have a suicide hotline, and when they have a case that seems hopeless, they always come to her. And so she would have a problem like there's a woman who has to live in the home of her father-in-law, and he is committing atrocious acts against her physically, and her life is a living hell in that family. And so, and because of her culture, she sees no way out, and the only way out is to commit suicide. And all our friend Kushbu says to her is, why do you let that man ruin your life? Just walk away. And, there will be people who help you and love you, and you don't have to stay there. And this woman stopped her suicide and moved on. And so, things do come up that are extremely serious, but we have to show people that there are ways out, and there are always others in the community who will help, it seems to me. And I'll shut up now.
No, that's a poignant life process of the way Kushbu allows people who are stuck in a gear. That one gear has opened up to become their whole life, to emerge and look out the window or out the door and realize they're the gearbox of their life. They can switch gears. They can move literally out of that pace and that rhythm and continue life. And instead of just literally getting locked up by yourself. And I think that's important, that transmission of how you move and how you move yourself, and understanding that there is something in the passage, as you said, the love on the other side, that there's actually the love in the passage for you to make a move.
Right. And I'm so pleased to announce that I had a wonderful conversation with Kushbu only yesterday. And she is planning to come to our confluence in Mount Madonna in October. And she's coming all the way from southernmost India, from Trivandrum, India, one of my favorite cities in India, in Kerala state. And that's where she lives now. And her whole 5-week trip is being covered by friends, people that she's helped over the years in various ways. And some people that she met through this YouTube channel. For example, we did a wisdom path session with Jackie Solomon, who is a woman who is doing a philanthropic group in Phoenix, Arizona, and Jackie is going to take Kushbu for 2 of the 5 weeks, and so her whole expense for her travel is going to be covered by her friends, including her airfare and everything. And she will be with us in California. And I do hope some of the people that are listening to us on YouTube, there are often hundreds, nearly 500 hits on many of these weekly sessions. I do hope that you'll come to Watsonville, because what we are going to do is look at the collective unconscious, and we're going to have a very, very diverse group with us, because besides Jordan and I, who are crazy enough, you'll have Kushbu there, and we have a a mural artist from Annapolis, Maryland, who's going to go with us and be there. And so we're going to have a very, very, very interesting, diverse group and sort of a snapshot on where we are as a country and as a collective. And it's something that is very difficult to get when you're at home in your own collective. It's hard to see out and see what the greater collective of the country and the world is. But we're Penelope Ryder from London is coming, and so we're going to have people from all over the world coming and participating, and it'll be a intimate group. There won't be more than 50 there, and it may be smaller than that. We don't mind, but we're showing people how these things can work and how the collective can help us all. And this is the whole life's work of Carl Jung. That's why we're reading the Red Book, because this is the starting point of his career. And really, it's all right there. When he says this is the prima materia of his life, as we go through it week by week, we can clearly see that that you can read the 20 collected works, but in a sense, they're beside the point, because he said it all right here in the Red Book.
Right.
And Art, if you can travel, we would love to have you present for this, and I'm sure you would make a terrific contribution. Art Patterson, for those that don't know, has been a very long time follower of this channel and has made, in his own life, he's made some terrific contributions to other men in his own life. And unfortunately, I don't have a link to an example of that at the moment, but Art, you could certainly put a link to what you've done in the past working with others, and put it on the chat if you want. I would love it if you would do that. And we would love to have you in California if you're able to travel that far. And so in any case, moving right along. Jordan, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Nope.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to put on the YouTube chat the link to the Confluence, so that you have, so every week we see how you can sign up and participate in our event, which for those of us who participated last year was exceptionally meaningful. And it made a very, very strong impression on all of us, that it made an indelible bond that we can't even describe. None of the participants in it can even describe, because it was so powerful. And my screen is making fun of me at the moment, so I'm going to have to play with it a minute. So let me read on for a bit. Okay. So, and I'm halfway through the second paragraph of the day, which is, I'm up to the last half sentence on page 345. And what will become of you then? You will be forced to restore what was before, namely violent deeds, murder, wrongdoing, and contempt for your brother. and one will be alien to the other, and confusion will rule. Now, that was in the middle of that paragraph, so I think I should go back and read a few other sentences. Okay, so he was talking about Christ and the highest law of love, and he says the same thing happened as in ancient times, but now under the law of love. So if you have no reverence for what has become, you will destroy the law of love. And what will become of you then? You will be forced to restore what was before, namely violent deeds, murder, wrongdoing, and contempt for your brother. And one will be alien to the other, and confusion will rule. Therefore, you should have reverence for what has become, so that the law of love may become redemption through the restoration of the lower and of the past, not perdition through the boundless mastery of the dead. But the spirit of those who die before their time will live, for the sake of our present incompleteness, in dark hordes in the rafters of our houses, and besiege our ears with urgent laments, until we grant them redemption through restoring what has existed since ancient times under the rule of love. What we call temptation is the demand of the dead, who passed away prematurely and incomplete through the guilt of the good and of the law. For no good is so complete that it could not do injustice and break what should not be broken. Okay, you want to comment on that, Jordan?
I think I'm going to let it stand and just let those words steep. And I think that last sentence is powerful, though. For no good is so complete that it could not do injustice and break what should not be broken. I guess my only comment goes back to Kushbu and how she helped that woman change gears. No good is so complete. It's always alive. And so the point is to keep it living and not judge so much the good and the bad, but to keep the both and of what keeps life moving.
Right. And I'll just remind everybody on YouTube that if you wish to join our conversation as a panelist, go here and register. And this is a link to our MailChimp account. And if you click on Sunday morning, you will receive the notices every week, plus the link of how to get into here if you wish to participate. Amela, did you have a comment?
Yeah, for me, it's the transitioning, there was this woman in my doctor's office the other day, and she had this tattoo of this bunny rabbit from this movie called Donnie Darko. And I don't want to ruin the movie for anyone who's interested in watching it. It's like a psychological thriller. And this young man, he encounters this Halloween costume, but the Halloween costume is his Halloween costume that he wore that year before there was a plane crash into his house. And so he is sort of transitioning from this realm of, am I alive or am I somewhere else? So he was sort of deeply into his subconscious mind and in that space where he was awake, but he wasn't really awake because he was dead. So I'm sorry if I ruined the movie for anyone, but he's actually dead. So the whole movie is about him thinking that he's alive and doing the things that he really wanted to do, but his life was cut short, so he never did those things that he dreamt of doing.
And so was the redemption? I mean,
No, the movie was basically going back and forth into memory
mhm,
and sort of connecting the memory into the like from the subconscious mind and the dream like storage from the unconscious mind, and basically like that storage space that we don't use in our mind, where
right.
all of the conscious and unconscious thoughts go. That's just my belief. Everything that went into that inaccessible storage room.
Well, it
He
seems
was sort of
what
there.
you're describing sounds to me like the
The psyche.
instantaneous. It sounds like an instantaneous event that occurs at a time when you die suddenly. For example,
Exactly.
right? For example, we had Prigozhin going down an airplane this week, but also 3 Marines were killed in an Osprey crash in Australia this week. Suddenly, these are young men who,
Oh, your video froze.
That's a lot of tragic things happening this week. Ay,
rotors tilt back and it can operate as a helicopter. So it's in the Marine inventory, and occasionally they have crashed in the past. And so these young men who are flying along and suddenly they're dead.
hmm.
It's like that instantaneous event. That entire movie could be thought of as that instantaneous event. But on the other hand, what we're talking about also is the fact that now it's the responsibility of all of us to live out what they gave their lives for, what their sacrifice was about. And of course, when Christ made his sacrifice, he no doubt knew that he would be physically dead, and he intentionally did that. Okay, he intentionally went into Jerusalem knowing that he would be arrested, knowing that he would not be able to argue with the Pharisees type stuff, and he voluntarily went to that to say, this isn't good enough and my life is about this. And he sacrificed his life intentionally, knowing that God would save him. And his one human moment was, my God, why have you forsaken me? When he probably at some level expected to die quickly. But aside from that human moment, he was a God, and he immediately went into heaven, no doubt. And this is the sum and substance of this statuette that my friend Tim Holmes made, the Returning the Nails, where Mary, Mother of God, is handing the nails back to the Roman authorities, because iron was a strategic element at that time, and they were collecting the nails after the crucifixion. So she's returning the nails, and in my mind, as I think about that, I mean, it's a very powerful idea to me, is that she's saying, here's your nails, here's what you did in the physical world, and you can do with them what you want, but I will carry the future with me, which she obviously did, and a quarter of the world now follows Christianity. as a result. So she carried the future with her, but it was something that she carried in spirit, not in the physical world. Here are your nails, take your nails. The future will be through the spirit of this man, my son. And that whole idea is so powerful. And I don't know how I got started on that, but
And it's also sort of like this message of don't touch my son anymore, you know, like this is the last time that you will touch my child. And I feel sorry for all of the prisoners that were also executed with him, because I don't know if they've also had that opportunity or even that privilege to have their family there, because so many of those people were victims of not only like petty crimes like theft or whatever, but things like, you know, injustices, like small injustices because of the colonization. And I feel sorry for them too. And I just want to acknowledge them as well. But
truly, well,
yeah,
and that's the point of the three crosses, isn't it? That there were two other men being crucified right next to Christ, and they weren't crucified the way Christ was. Christ was crucified by being nailed to the cross, and he was killed by being stabbed by a spear in his gut. But those other two criminals, one went to hell and one went to heaven. You know, if you're going to be crucified, you're going to die pretty surely. If somebody doesn't get you off the cross soon enough, but you die from suffocation. You don't die normally from a piercing wound, and so those two men were undergoing an excruciating death of suffocation, and you know, whoever stabbed Christ with the spear was trying to expedite his death as some sort of show of mercy, I suppose. And obviously the Roman authority, and usually you were tied to your cross, you were not nailed to your cross, right? And so you wouldn't even be losing blood or anything. So Christ underwent an exceptionally excruciating death, but we all have the risk every day of walking out of our house and getting hit by a car, and that's not very, very pleasant either. But the point is, do you live in a loving society and a loving community, or are you an evil person? Are you unredeemable and therefore are remembered as being in hell? And you know, those two men who died with Christ, it's very clear that one is in heaven and one is in hell to this day, and we know it. We're reliving it for them right now. Okay.
it's like a biker club, you know. Everybody wants to be in the biker club, but one guy's gonna end up going to heaven and the other guy's gonna end up going to hell.
Something like that.
But the interesting thing for me, I didn't know that he was also stabbed in the gut. But that's so fascinating because the stomach, unless I'm thinking of the esophagus, the stomach, isn't it shaped sort of like an embryo, like a human embryo?
Yeah, but I don't think he
That's
was
so
stabbed there.
interesting.
I think he was stabbed below the rib cage.
Yeah, there's a lower aorta, and you bleed
Right.
out in 72 seconds. So that would be a show.
Yeah. And let's see.
It's interesting because maybe they were assuming like, oh, it would be the death will be faster. But then the mother's thinking like, no, I want to heal him and bring him back to life, so
Yeah.
it's very unfortunate and horrible.
Right.
But
Okay,
also
so
it's
there are a couple. Go ahead, but there are a couple of comments that I want to
yeah,
address on
it's
YouTube. But go ahead.
it's very symbolic as well, because the same thing happened to Muhammad. The Muslims burned him, and so I'm just so confused, because here is something so sacred, that humanity has this savior, this hero figure, and yet somehow, some way, comes mass hysteria, and so people come together, sort of like that story, the lottery, and everyone just comes together and decides, we're gonna go kill this person because they know too much. You're too wise. We don't like you because you're too wise, and we want to eliminate you. So, goodbye. Like, we're just gonna go back to our ordinary selves and our gods and goddesses or whatever, and just get rid of you. It's very strange.
Yeah. All right. I want to address Richard's comment here. Richard says Jung must have had a good time with the illusion Dionysian mysteries. I find them to be an evil that I must overcome. And it seems to me
Eleusinian mysteries. Is that
the illusion mysteries, the Greek mysteries.
Oh yeah,
And,
Eleusinian. It's
yeah.
Leeleu. Okay.
Yeah, right. And what I would say is that you will never overcome them, Richard. The problem is that they are in us. And so, for example, Mardi Gras is a time when people dress up in strange clothes and in strange costumes, and they do it so that they can act out that part of their life. And we all have done it at some point in time. I had a country western outfit complete with a hat and boots and everything, and used to go out line dancing with my wife back in the day. And there was some part of me that wanted to dance, and my wife too, and we had a lot of fun with it for a period of time. We see it in like Mardi Gras. We see it in the Philadelphia Mummers Parade, which was traditionally always a way to act out on New Year's Day with a big drunk. Okay, so in the Mummers Parade, people spent all year learning to play a banjo or whatever it was, the string bands of the Mummers Parade. And there in the Philadelphia area, there were like 28 string bands, and they marched down Market Street and right past the department stores and everything in downtown Philadelphia, and they have these outrageous costumes. A lot of men dress in drag during the Mummers Parade, and that's basically a way once a year to get their yayas out. And Jung talked about these ceremonies in Europe where people would have a parade you know, play act other creatures, but it is a way to, you know, play out that part of ourselves and then go back into civilized society the next day, maybe with a hangover. if you don't have the day off on January 2nd, but those we all have to have something that gets rid of our frustrations, whatever it is. And so if you know, if we go to drink or we go to take drugs, you know, it may kill us, but if we learn how to control those things, then it may be okay. You know, we now have legalized marijuana for recreational use in the state of Maryland, and a lot of other states have done so too. You know, in small proportion, it's not bad, but if it leads, you know, it's no worse than smoking or drinking, both of which will also kill you, right? If you don't do it in moderation. So the key to life is everything in moderation, including moderation.
I was going to say, yeah, because life
right?
itself is fatal, so
Yeah,
we might as well enjoy it here.
Precisely. So, you know, we should, you know, we have to recognize that we are like that. People are like that. Everyone is like that. And so you can't overcome the evil that is within you because it's a part of you. You know, you might cut off your arm or something like that. That might stop you from doing something. But, you know, on the other hand, is that a solution? Not so much. And
well, and
I
think personally, the concern with we all have evil inside us. I think there's an over concern with that we all have evil inside us. It's kind of a crowd control device because, you know, there are just things I don't need laws to tell me not to do. And, you know, to support life, to support others. And I think too, I have to kind of soapbox a little bit about, I don't think there's as much evil present as people think. And at the same time, maybe I'm just naive, but the reality is I think it's because you see the both and as an adult, rather than someone being, you know, led along by the nose, the power of suggestion can, if you think about, I think guilt or evil too much, it tends to deflate your life instead of commanding in the authority of abundance and of doing the things that are nourishing, the things that you like, because I don't think it's cutting it by half and half to be zero. I think that guilt and evil are kind of like original sin in a way. And I think that, you know, I don't feel ashamed that I was born. And I think that it's important, I think, not to get too hopped up on and over focus on evil, because you become what you think in that way. And if I'm going to put really bad gas in my car, I'm going to expect it to sputter and not run well. And I'd rather put the things in you know, my body and my life that I think will help me run well. And evil, I don't think, is one of those. So anyway.
Right. So Justin says, dreaming of doing simultaneously with this, I am watching the Danish astronaut and soon chief of the ISS boarding the International Space Station live on NASA's YouTube channel. Amen to that, Justin.
That's got to be much more interesting than us. So
yeah, and then Dionysus says and reminds us of the good thief. He says, truly I say to you, today you will be in paradise, or today you will be with me in paradise, which is what Christ said to the good thief. on the cross. And then Richard goes back and says, Christ showed us purposely his human side. The why have you forsaken me? Showed to those having understanding that even though we think God has left us, he is still there for us eternally. And, you know, no doubt, I mean, that's kind of the point.
And I appreciate this. I would prefer we get back to Jung. I think we've gotten onto a support Christianity bent instead of the metaphor of the Christ that he's talking about. I think he talks about him literally, but the metaphor of Christ as self from Ion chapter 5, I kind of feel like I appreciate what we're talking about here, but in a way we've, from a Jungian perspective, I think digressed a bit today.
Yeah, maybe so. And then Art asked me if I meant him, and I did mean you, Art. And thank you for giving me permission to share your video. But in the middle of this session, I'm unable to go back and find it. And so if you have the time, I was simply inviting you, Art Patterson, that if you want to share your video, please put a link to it on the YouTube channel. It will be very, very meaningful to everyone, and as it was to me. And I would love for you to share it, but I just can't stop while I'm in the middle of doing everything here that needs to be done. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
I wanted to make a comment about the evil part.
Yes, please.
I have something called the evil eye, and then I have the Hamza with the evil eye.
Mm-hmm.
So my evil eye doesn't necessarily mean evil. It's just that's this superstition that oftentimes people who are well-intentioned and well-meaning, and they look at you, but then they sort of obsess over you, going back to everything in moderation. And so there's this belief that oftentimes when someone is becoming like manically obsessive, going back to the agape mania, the Greek love theory. And so it can cause one illness when thinking of the person a little bit too much, obsessing over the person. And so when I think of the word evil, I think about not only, it's not as simple as good and bad, because we have things that we misinterpret and think that it's evil, but oftentimes over time it can be that actually it wasn't meant as harm, but rather as something to learn. So it really depends when we're using the word evil and how we're using the word evil to interpret certain situations or events, if that makes
Sure.
any sense.
It makes complete sense, because there's a continuum of all of this stuff. Sometimes something that can look incredibly evil, okay, it can turn out that was something that God did to make something incredibly good happen 300 years in the future, or in our case, from Christ 2,000 years in the future. And so, isn't it something that looks incredibly evil that that God allowed his own son to be crucified? I mean, Jung talks about this. What kind of a God is that allows his own son to be crucified? And yet that was what was necessary to now have affected a quarter of the human race. Okay. If Christ hadn't been crucified, would we be talking about him at all today? Probably not. You know, I don't talk about King Herod very much, and or any of these other people. I mean, the only reason we talk about him is because of Christ. You know, otherwise he would just have been another I don't know, Egyptian, Roman.
Well, and I think Amella's point of perspective kind of brings Hades, the Lord of the Underworld, to mind to me, where look at the terrifying, evil, mean, Cerberus, three-headed dog. Well, if you know anything about language, Cerberus comes from Kerber, which is Indo-European, means spotted. So then I think, oh, look at this terrifying dog. Oh, wait, Hades, the Lord of the Underworld, named his dog Spot. So then all of a sudden the terror disappears and I see it differently. And then I'm going, well, I'm certainly not going to, run up to it and say, hey, you want a treat? But I think the perspective can enable, allow, facilitate seeing something for what it is instead of what you expect it to be. And I think then, like you said, you don't talk about King Herod that much. And that's a good point. And why? And well, there's this whole other storyline, much more intensely applicable to the human psyche, whereas Herod would just be part of it.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to read this last segment, and then while Jordan, you and Amela comment on it, I'm going to quickly see if I can find Art's video. And because there is a request for it from Kathy, and I'm not sure how easy it is for Art to give it to us at this time also. So let me see if I can do that, but I want to read this section first. Okay, so this is through the end of Nox Secunda, the second night. We are a blinded race. We live only on the surface, only in the present, and think only of tomorrow. We deal roughly with the past in that we do not accept the dead. We want to work only with visible success. Above all, we want to be paid. We would consider it insane to do hidden work that does not visibly serve men. There is no doubt that the necessity of life forced us to prefer only those fruits one can taste. But who suffers more from the tempting and misleading influence of the dead than those who have gone wholly missing on the surface of the world? There is one necessary but hidden and strange work, a major work, which you must do in secret for the sake of the dead. He who cannot attain his own visible field and vineyard is held fast by the dead, who demand the work of atonement from him. And until he has fulfilled this, he cannot get to his outer work, since the dead do not let him. He shall have to search his soul and act in stillness at their behest and complete the mystery, so that the dead will not let him. Do not look forward so much, but back and into yourself, so that you will not fail to hear the dead. It belongs to the way of Christ that he ascends with few of the living, but many of the dead. His work was the salvation of the despised and lost, for whose sake he was crucified between two criminals. I suffer my agony between two madmen. I enter the truth if I descend. I become accustomed to being alone with the dead. It is difficult, but this is precisely how you will discover the worth of your living companions. What the ancients did for their dead, you seem to believe that you can absolve yourself from the care of the dead and from the work that they do greatly demand, since what is dead is past. You excuse yourself with your disbelief in the immortality of the soul. Do you think that the dead do not exist because you have devised the impossibility of immortality? You believe in your idols of words. The dead produce effects that is sufficient. The dead produce effects that is sufficient. In the inner world, there is no explaining away, as little as you can explain away the sea in the outer world. You must finally understand your purpose in explaining away, namely to seek protection. I accepted the chaos, and in the following night, my soul approached me. And then there was a footnote. The draft continues. You employ old word magic to protect yourself from superstition, for you are still a powerless child of the old wood. But we can see behind your word magic, and it is rendered feeble, and nothing protects you against the chaos other than acceptance. And so I just mentioned that the next section, called Nox Tertia, the third night, is January 18th, 1914. And I just want to point out that all this, everything that we've read up until now, occurred in a 3-week period from Christmas night, 1913, to the night before January 18th, 1914. So not even a month has passed. And Jung has had all these visions, and we're about 2/3 of the way through the Red Book at this point. And so it's just an incredible thing. So Jordan, go ahead.
I'd say that the last sentence to me says so much. I accepted the chaos, and in the following night, my soul approached me. And what's interesting to me there, I always substitute the word capital N, nature, for chaos, because it's not order and disorder, it's nature. And so when you accept your nature, that you are part of nature, that you are nature, your soul approaches you. And it's not this, oh, hi, soul, what's your name? I think it fills you. And in a sense, your structure, the way that any of us is composed and alive, is more clean, because it's more full, it's more expansive. And then that actually becomes more simple, as we then work with, I guess the word keeps coming up, our structure, crystalline lattice structure, any resonance, that how are we put together? What is our nature? So when he accepted the chaos, his soul approached him. I think that's very, very important in regards to, warts and all. It's like, it's you're you and I'm me. And when that's accepted, I think pretty wonderful things happen.
Yeah.
And still terrible things too. But at the same time, I think the life is lived more fully.
Right. And so I'm just looking back here, and let me just see.
For me, I was thinking of, I'm still thinking of Artemisia of Caria, and how she deceived the Greeks. She deceived the Greeks in the naval warfare by using the Greek tactics and sort of like disguising herself as a Greek ship or a supporter of the Greek naval army, but actually the whole time she was with Xerxes of Persia, and she sort of killed her own man, but at the same time, the place that she's originally from is modern day Turkey. So, in terms of how one would interpret this as good or as evil, at the end of the day, it could also be seen as coming to common ground as being a traitor, because she deceived the Greeks into believing that she was one of them when she really wasn't. So is that evil? Yeah, I think that's pretty evil because she deceived someone. So it's not like when I was a kid and my mom wanted me to do my homework and I was too busy listening to the radio. So she would, I mean, this was back in the day. Now she just takes out the plugs from the Wi-Fi cable. But back in the day, she would have to unplug my radio and take away my radio cable. And I would have to actually finish doing my homework um, in order to gain my radio cable back. So, at the time I thought she was the worst person in the whole world, but now I understand she wanted me to do my homework so I could finish elementary school. Because that was the last time they had radio cables with cassettes.
Interesting. I just like to answer what I was looking for to Art Patterson. Art, I did find the email that you sent me with the link, but when I click on that link now, it says video is unavailable. And so I am unable to share your video. And so it would be your call whether to provide us again with a link to the video. It's a very, very moving video, and it comes from one thing which Art has said, which is that a man's work is let's see, how did you put it? Disability can't get in the way of men's work with Art Patterson. And so Art has a certain disability, which I won't discuss here unless he does. But his life's work, or part of his major life's work, has been to not let disability get in the way of his contribution to the world. And it's very, very incredible what he did with that video. And so Art, if you can hear me, I hope that you will make that video available again, because I think the world needs to see it.
Maybe we can see it next week.
Yeah, certainly we can at least have the link next week, but I think Art is going to have to allow the permissions or something like that. So, but anyway, life is chaos, and no matter what you think you can do to keep it organized, it's still going to be chaos. And if you make the chaos your enemy, then you're not going to solve anything, because the enemy, the chaos, will fight back very definitely. And going back to Richard's comment about what is good and what is evil, I mean, lots of people in our public in our current affairs, whether they be red or blue, think that the other side is evil. And that's not the case at all. We're all Americans, and the ones that are Americans, and we're all human beings if you're not American. And the case that we have to make, which I often reiterate, is that we have to see our fellow human beings where they are and who they are, and what made them the way they are, and if possible to open up their unconscious in a way where they will heal themselves from whichever side, and eventually will gradually grow back together again, because we're not different. Okay, the difference between a human being born today in one of the remotest parts of Africa where the human species emerged is almost identical with any other human being on the planet, even today. Right. And so and in that population, which I've had occasion to see a couple of videos interviewing them, some of them look like Japanese, and I have the personal experience of having had business in Brownsville, Texas, which is on the right on the Rio Grande, on the Texas Mexico border, and the Hispanic people there, to me, look more Japanese than the typical Spaniard in Spain, far more Japanese than the typical Spaniard. And when you think about how genetically that appearance managed to get from obviously from Central Asia, the Japanese and the Koreans are Altaic people, meaning that they descended from people who developed in the Altai mountains of central, what is today Russia. They descended from those Altaic people. So for those genes to get from the Altai mountains to Brownsville, Texas, one way or another, is quite something. It must have happened over tens of thousands of years, but it's definitely there. And so, as Justin says here, we're all Berliners too. Ich bin ein Berliner, which was JFK's famous line when he went to the Berlin Wall. Richard, I'm sorry to hear that. My father-in-law had Parkinson's in his lifetime, and it's a difficult disease, especially in the later stages. And I have my mother-in-law who has now moved in with Debbie and me, so that we can help her more. She's approaching 93 years old, and she cared for my father-in-law for 15 years during the course of his Parkinson's disease. And she was an angel during that time. And I mentioned Debbie regularly that her mother lived the archetypal life of a mother perfectly. She raised her children, she cared for her ailing husband, and she's a saintly person. She didn't have a very broad life because the family wasn't very wealthy, but they made sure that their daughter would have a very broad life, which Debbie was fortunate to go to a leading college, women's college here in the United States, which is Connecticut College. It's now co-ed, but at the time she went, it was for women. And she was able to go on a semester afloat on a ship university for a semester. And those were all through the sacrifices of her parents, amazingly. And in that one semester, Debbie visited 14 countries and probably changed her life incredibly. And, she's probably upstairs saying Buddhist mantras right now, as a matter of fact. So anyway, any closing thoughts, Jordan, in terms of
Thanks for today. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think upon further reflection, maybe we didn't digress. Maybe we just dialed in deeper into one spot, which I think is sometimes it's important to get stuck in the quicksand, so to speak, so we can then learn to emerge and float out of it. And I think today was pretty versatile.
Yeah. So Kathy says the divisiveness between us is so crazy, and I'm sad. And what we can say with assurance, Kathy, is that this too will pass. And the Jung often talked about the concept of enantiodromia, which means the tendency of something that's well entrenched to become its opposite. And we actually see that in American politics very clearly, because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and the Democrats were the party of the Deep South for 100 years or more, and yet now all those people that thought of themselves as Democrats at the time of George Wallace and Lester Maddox and all those people, they all thought they were Democrats. Now they would be Republican. And so everything changes. And we're seeing, notwithstanding the glaring Head and Shoulders photograph, that was maybe the last moment at the pinnacle of that man's power. And yes, one man did manage over 40 years or so to build himself up so that he could be president of the United States briefly. But we recognize what he did to us, and we recognize the issues in our system. And while he may still have a certain amount of strength, time will tell. But I would suggest that motorcade on Thursday night and the Head and Shoulders photo is the beginning of the end. That's the highest that he can achieve. And yes, he raised $7.1 million on a photograph. He's a Luciferian artist of the first degree. but I think it will bring us back, because that photograph, I think he intended it for it to mean, I'm going to get you. Okay, there's going to be payback, and I'm coming after you. But I think it also can be interpreted as his fear and his knowledge of what's coming for him. And it's coming. There's going to be a accounting, and there won't be any ifs, ands, or buts about it. It may take us 10 or 20 years to start writing the history of it. But one thing I can say, and my role as a prophet is that that man will never be president of the United States again. And, God knows how he'll slide out of ever going to jail. I'm not sure that he'll ever go to jail, but he will, I believe that 5 years from now, you won't be able to find anybody that will admit that they supported him. It'll be that bad. But who knows?
Similar to World War II.
Yeah, I mean, right after World War II, you couldn't find a German that was a Nazi ever. And they all were. Okay. And so that sort of thing can happen. And now we know, when, the Jewish community has always said never again about the Holocaust. And what we know now is that it can happen again. If we aren't vigilant, it will happen. And so we need to be very cognizant of that. And, and this is the way the human mind works. And we don't understand how the human mind works, an individual human and the collective of humans. And so Carl Jung said, the world hangs by a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man. The world hangs by a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man. And, we have been for a couple of decades now been in a war at the psychological level to understand ourselves and to keep from going over the abyss again. And, if we do go over the abyss again, it's going to be generations before we resolve it, as we see from the experience that was World War II. And, but people do change, things do change. I mean, after World War II, the Japanese and the Germans became our best allies, our strongest allies. And although England is a strong ally, it's a fading ally. And although the French were our great allies in the Revolutionary War, nowadays not so much. However, we all know what's the difference between right and wrong. Some choose wrong. That's the way it is. But over the centuries, things do get better. And so I'm very hopeful, and I'm very hopeful that at Confluence and also on these YouTube videos, we open people's unconscious, give them access to their own unconscious. I'm not proselytizing anything. Okay, I'm not saying anybody is right or wrong. I'm saying you have to look in yourself and find the answer.
I'm gonna need to get going.
Peace, Jordan.
Thank you.
Jordan.
Thanks for today.
Amela, did you have anything more you wanted to say? Thanks, Jordan.
When I think about the past and think about the future, I get worried because in this beautiful land that I call my home, which is the United States of America, we weren't really necessarily responsible for colonization. I don't even think Switzerland, where Jung is from, had anything to do with colonization, but we're always being ostracized. I feel like, that, we try to colonize, blah, blah. But my concern is, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I'm worried about our economy. Everybody survives with money in their pocket. And I'm so worried because recently some other countries joined the BRIC, which is Brazil, Russia, Iran, China.
India, China.
India, China. Sorry, India, China. And so some of the other countries had joined in, and I'm so worried. I understand that it's because some countries have been excluded and embargoed, so just to bring their economics economy stabilized. I understand that, but at the same time I worry because there's always this misconception, and I feel like that lack of knowledge and lack of understanding, and it can be dangerous. So it's very important for someone to do their research and to understand, that maybe these collective biases is not the best way to go, because it's dangerous.
Right. And, people, Jung used to call it the power devil. It's not love versus hate, it's love versus power. And we have to understand that. But when you refer to the BRICS, for example, they try to sell us fear, for example, by saying that Russia and China are going to be together and be our enemies. And I had that fear when I was in college, and my professor of Asian history, who was kind of a surrogate father to me, said, and his name was Edwin B. Lee. He was like the Southern gentleman Lees, and he said, China and Russia are natural enemies and always will be, because the longest border in the world between any two countries at that time was between the USSR and China. That is their biggest threat. And so, yes, you see whatever his name, Ping, and Putin meeting together and that sort of thing. And they do make agreements, and so do we. But in the end, if you get down to the bottom line, they are our natural enemies. And China even built a wall to it. They spent 1,500 years building a wall that was totally useless because the Mongols, who are now the Chinese, the Qing dynasty, the predecessors of Kublai Khan and Genghis Khan, and then Kublai Khan, those were Mongols. They went around the wall.
Yeah, they were smart.
Right. And we look at trade deficit, and you look at our trade deficit. If we were to cut off imports from China, the Chinese economy would collapse. I mean, the thing that Nixon and the thing that Nixon and his Secretary of State, the European man, whose name escapes me at the moment, did when they made the first trip to China back in '72, about then, was they opened up the U.S. market to Chinese goods, making it possible for China to have this wonderful renaissance that they've had in terms of their economy. But if ever we were to cut off the connection between the Chinese and the United States, from a marketing and economic point of view, China would just collapse. No doubt about it. There's no doubt whatsoever.
And that's the other problem, because China is very rich in culture and is ethnically diverse. They have, I think, maybe 100 different ethnic minorities. Like India, they have all these ethnic minorities, and they're so rich in culture, so rich in theology and history and natural medicine and all these things. And for some reason, I feel that, even here in the United States, we have a lot of knowledge of so many different things. But for some reason, we're just so disconnected. We are so disconnected from the purpose of doing something. For example, I saw this young man, he had just finished college, and he posted this video on social media of him basically monotonous with this face, which is an unimpressed face, and he's in this different background of commuting to work, and then sitting in his office typing something, and then going out with friends, and then going back home listening to his wife talk to him. And then and then I read the comments, and people say things like, "You have no idea how blessed you are, you're living my dream." And another comment, "Oh, you're rich, that's not fair." What is your salary like? And so many different things pop up. And in my perspective, it's about having that meaning of the purpose in doing something, that meaning,
Precisely.
purposeful meaning in what you're doing. So it's difficult, where one person is
Well, we each have to do what is right from where we sit. Okay. And one of the reasons to get a good education is you don't know what will happen in your lifetime. You have no clue, good or bad. I was watching the famous movie Dr. Zhivago last week, and I said, "Oh my God, this is actually a metaphor for my life." Okay. It's really, Dr. Zhivago just got pushed pillar to post throughout his life, and yet he kept going and kept doing things, and some people came along and helped him, including his brother, in the end, it turned out. And his brother had been a policeman, a general in the police. And so, if I look at my life, when I was graduating from college, I got myself certified to teach school, because I thought, well, you never know when you'll need it. And that was a temporary certificate, but I was allowed to get a permanent certificate when I graduated from law school, even though I never taught a day. And so I have a permanent teaching certificate from the state of New York to teach social studies, grade 7 through 12, which was issued to me in 1974. And, but I never taught a day until last September, when I became a substitute teacher, only because I said, okay, well, it would be nice to have a little bit more money in the house, and also um, there's such a shortage in teachers. Maybe I'll step up, and so I did, and uh, I found I liked it, and I found I'm still able to do it, even though my next birthday is 77. I'll be 77 in October,
Mhm.
and so now I've taken on a job as a Unit 1 teacher.
So I have a question. If you were to do this job in 1980, would you feel as comfortable with what you know now compared to then? I
Oh, of
mean,
course not.
haven't you acquired so much more wisdom between that time and today?
Well, between 1968, when I graduated from college, and when I talk about Dr. Zhivago, um, when I was coming out of college, it was either, join the military or go in the draft. And I had grown up in the military, so I didn't want to be drafted as a private. I wanted to serve as an officer. And so I voluntarily joined the Marine Corps in an officer program and got myself commissioned. And but there's this scene in Dr. Zhivago where Zhivago is riding along on his horse, and all of a sudden these men ride up to him and said, uh, "Comrade Doctor, we need medical officers. Comrade
Mhm.
medical officer, we're Red Guards and we shoot deserters." Okay, that was the switch in Dr.
Mm.
Zhivago, that he was captured by this group, and suddenly he's drafted in the army again, which he had also already been serving. And so that's how our lives go sometimes. And um,
It happens. And
yeah,
and
and
you know, it has so much more meaning than how I feel, the way that I feel about, how we're making decisions and just clocking in and clocking out and these fancy job titles that we have. I remember asking my mother once, "Don't you want to be a manager where you work?" And she told me, "Absolutely not." And I told her, "But you're going to get paid more money." This was like 10 years ago, "But you're going to get paid more money, and you can leave your job earlier when you finish everything that you have to do," because she
yeah.
works really fast.
Mhm.
And she told me, "Well, first of all, the reason why I don't want to be a manager at my job is because I'm not going to be seen as, as a colleague in being one with my other coworkers, but now they're going to see me as their superior."
Yeah.
And
Well, and
also, yeah.
yeah, it
And
takes
also
all
because
types.
she said it's a lot more work, it's a lot more work. So either way, we have to equally put in the amount of work unless we're doing the job not so well. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because, we're talking about current events. What about this week? What happened to in Fukushima? They
Oh
released
yeah,
the wastewater, but
yeah,
and just like Chernobyl, these little human errors that are costing us our future. And people have this excuse, which is really offensive. Like, well, I'm not going to be around when all the fish in the sea become toxic and you
yeah.
can't eat them.
Well, and you'll eat them and not know it. Um,
Yeah.
and and so you know, but my point is especially that you have to have a good education so you're prepared. As you rightly said, if I had gone into teaching, let's say in 1980, as a place in my career to do it. Okay, that's 43 years ago. What would I have done? I would certainly have tried to become a, a principal, an administrator of a school, and then possibly a superintendent of schools. One of my classmates is Janet Robinson, who was the superintendent of schools in the place where that horrible attack on the elementary school happened, where all those children were killed. Janet was my classmate in high school in Japan.
Oh, wow.
And so if if I had gone into school teaching in 1968 or 80 or whatever you choose, I would almost certainly have ended up as an administrator like Janet. But now what I'm doing is working with kids who are problem kids, or who are, who need guidance, but in an empathetic way, not in a, boy, if you do this, I'm going to put you in jail. No, not like that at all. It's helping those children see how they need to live their lives in order to have a good life.
I think that's pretty much what happened with Jung. Like right before the war, he had these other plans. He was planning on writing this literature, presenting, and so many different things he had planned for the whole year. He had a whole itinerary. He was ready to go. But then all of a sudden there was a churn of events and the First World War took place. And so, he has this huge transition in his life where he has this revelation of, here I am talking the talk, but now I actually have to walk the walk. And so he's having these experiences in the Red Book that are phenomenal and extraordinary.
Right. And he says it right in the first two paragraphs of the Red Book, which said, I had to turn everything in my life around, everything around and turn my back on it. And that's what he did. And he spent the next 40 years writing about it. And that's why we have 20 volumes of his collected works. But it all started from the Red Book, from that period, from the time when, he was Freud's wunderkind. Freud saw him as his crown prince for a period of time, for 6 years. They worked together very closely, and then they broke over the point that Freud wanted to reduce everything to logic, and Jung said, everything isn't logical. That's not the way the world is. Right?
Yeah, so. And I was rereading Karen Horney, and she was speaking about basically what so many psychoanalysts are speaking of in, for people with like mood and personality disorders, self-expression and having that safe space to feel the freedom to express oneself, and going back to these very strict cultures where people have to follow a specific tradition. There are small glimpses of, within a culture where a person can express themselves individually, such as, the way that they stitch their traditional clothing, or the way that they dance, or, adding a little extra sugar or a little extra cinnamon to that traditional dish. So there are little opportunities to have joy in that individual self-expression, which is very good. But I'm very grateful for Freud, but at the same time, Freud kind of also reminds me of this other ancient doctor whose name I can't remember for some reason. Was it But maybe one day we're going to understand what Freud was talking about, because maybe we're not ready for this knowledge yet. Maybe in the future we will understand. And I'm so glad that this channel exists, because I am so confused sometimes with what Jung is what he's trying to say, because I'm interpreting it in my own the way that I perceive Jung, and then there's the way that everyone else perceives Jung, because it's a little abstract.
Yeah, well, in the simplest terms, Freud wanted railroad tracks. He was steeped in the philosophy of Western Europe, let's say, and philosophy is all rational. Okay, everything is rational in philosophy, and he wanted to plug everything in to those railroad tracks, those rational things that human beings have figured out over all these years. Jung recognized that there is also the irrational, that there's two sides of everything, and it all depends on where you sit. And you have to understand that it's like last week I showed the statue of the child holding two snakes.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that we say or do in our lives is part of a continuum, of a duality, because that's where we get the energy to do things. That's where psychic energy comes from. And there's two snakes there. And you can say one is good and one is evil, but actually our job is to hold on to both of them. That's what the human being is, to get the balance between the two correct. That's the point. And so you have to give, Freud's point of view would be everything can be explained rationally, and Jung's point was, no, it can't. I mean, it's just like me talking about my story about my father's death this morning, where I can very rationally talk about his death, but when I started to weep telling that story, that's irrational. That's not rational. Okay, if I was rational, I'd be very strong and absolutely knowing exactly what was happening and blah 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 blah. But I open my unconscious. It's like Hemingway was asked, how does he write a novel? And he said, well, I open a vein and bleed. And that's a metaphor for he opens up his heart. He opened up his heart and allowed what was in his heart to come out into his writing, into his into For Whom a Bell Tolls and all of his other writing. And the most famous novelists, Gabriel Garcia Marquez is another one who wrote Love in the Time of Cholera. And it was like a 400-page poem that he wrote, and you cannot guess the end. You can read the end first and not get it until you have to read the entire novel, and the last word in the novel is forever, and you cannot possibly understand what he was saying without reading every word of the novel from beginning to end. It's one of the most brilliant pieces of literature I've ever read, Love in the Time of Cholera. And they made a movie of it, and that was the Logos taking over. The Logos picks, cherry picked a few incidents that occurred in the novel and, put them up on the screen. But in the end, you can't get it from the movie. It's like when you've read a novel, you then see the movie and you say, oh, it wasn't as good as the novel, it wasn't as good as the book. And that's why, because a good novelist has opened a vein and bled, has put their heart into the novel, and a movie can't do that. A movie has to logically think about, okay, what's the story, and we have Oppenheimer right now, and we watched Oppenheimer, and I don't think that people understand the significance of the exchange between General Leslie Grove and Oppenheimer, where Grove says, I heard that you're not sure that you might set the whole atmosphere on fire and kill everything on Earth. And Oppenheimer says, yeah, very little chance. And Grove says, well, I want no chance. Oppenheimer couldn't give him that. And oh, by the way, he did. He set the atmosphere on fire, just not in that way. It's a metaphor for the fact that nothing has been the same since the Alamogordo test. Nothing in the world has been the same since then. And it may burn us alive yet. Okay. And this goes back to Jung's point, the world hangs by a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man. We now have godlike power, and we can destroy the earth and all living things on it. So
we can't have nothing nice.
Yeah. So anyway, I have to excuse myself and move on with my day. And I will see you all next week. Thank you for the chat, Mel.